Every level of corn addiction. Level 1, the innocent. You are 6 years old, and it is summer, and there is corn on the cob, and that is the whole story. Your grandmother has a garden, and she grows it in the back corner, where the fence leans a little from years of nothing holding it up. She picks the ears in the morning before the heat settles in. She shucks them at the kitchen table with a pile of silk building up around her hands like something being unraveled. You watch. She doesn't say much about what she's doing. She doesn't have to. The pot is already on. When it's ready, she puts the ear on your plate with a little dish of butter beside it. You roll it through the butter the way you've seen your father do it. The butter melts into the roes. You eat the whole thing, turning it like a typewriter that only knows one word, and the word is good. You don't think about what corn is or where it comes from or what it does inside the body. You think about the butter and the salt and the way a summer afternoon feels when you have nowhere to be and someone is feeding you. That's it. That's the whole relationship at this level. It's pure. There's no information yet to make it complicated. You're just a small person eating a yellow thing and everything is fine. Most people who love corn started here. Most people stayed pretty close to here for a while. The garden, the pot, the butter, the porch. Simple and good and not yet strange at all. You are not going to stay here. Level 2, the casual consumer. You are somewhere between 20 and 40 years old, and you have a soda with your lunch and chips with your dinner and a granola bar in the afternoon, and you buy the store-brand breakfast cereal and the ketchup on the bottom shelf and a bottle of sports drink because you read somewhere that electrolytes matter. You are eating corn at every single meal and you have no idea. This is the level most people live their entire lives and never leave. The corn is invisible here. It is not sitting on a cob with butter pooling in the grooves. It has been processed and refined and renamed and inserted into things that don't taste like corn and don't smell like corn and are not marketed as having anything to do with corn. But it is there. High fructose corn syrup is in the soda you drink, obviously, but also in the soup you heat up on a cold night, in the salad dressing you pour on the salad you made specifically to be healthy, in the bread you bought because the package had the word whole on it. Corn starch thickens the sauce. Corn oil fries the thing. Dextrose, which comes from corn, preserves the other thing. Citric acid, derived most often from corn, keeps the other thing shelf-stable for 18 months in a way that nature would not have permitted on its own. Modified food starch, maltodextrin, xanthan gum, corn syrup solids, crystalline fructose, at least a dozen names on a label that all trace back to the same plant. A plant biologist at the University of California, Berkeley, named Todd Dawson developed a method to test how much corn a person is eating by analyzing a strand of their hair. The carbon from corn has a specific signature that gets recorded in your tissues as you consume it. In 2007, CNN's chief medical correspondent Sanjay Gupta had his hair tested. 69% of the carbon came from corn. Not because he was eating corn every day. Because corn had made its way into enough of his diet to constitute the majority of what his body was literally built from. 69%. That number sat in the public consciousness for a while, then went away because there was not really anything convenient to do with it. You are at this level right now, almost certainly. The corn is already in you. It got there while you were looking at something else. Level 3, the label reader. Something happens. Maybe it's a documentary. Maybe it's a book. Maybe it's a conversation at a dinner party that you couldn't get away from. Whatever it is, it plants a seed, which is maybe the right metaphor here, and now you start reading labels. The first time you do it at a grocery store, you stand in the aisle for 7 minutes holding a jar of pasta sauce, reading words you don't fully recognize, and the person behind you has to reach around you to get the other jar, the one with a different picture on the front that contains the exact same list of ingredients. You buy neither. You go home and look things up. High fructose corn syrup was introduced commercially in the 1970s. Before that, soda was sweetened with sugar. Then Earl Butz, the Secretary of Agriculture under Richard Nixon, remade farm policy around cheap corn. He told farmers to plant fence row to fence row. The idea was to produce so much corn that the price would collapse, which would lower the cost of food, which would lower inflation. It worked technically. Corn became so cheap to produce that the processed food industry found 1,000 new ways to use it. High fructose corn syrup was cheaper than sugar and extended shelf life and was metabolized differently by the body, and the food companies loved it. Today, corn sweeteners show up in roughly 75% of packaged foods. Not all of them sweet. Not all of them foods you'd expect. Canned soup, crackers, luncheon meat, bread that tastes like bread, not like candy, still contains added corn sweeteners because the added sweetness makes the bread more palatable, and more palatable means more of it eaten, and more eaten means more sold. This is not a conspiracy. It is a business model so successful it became invisible. You stand in supermarkets differently now. You read differently. You start doing math in your head about what percentage of the average American's grocery cart is, at some level, corn. The answer is uncomfortable enough that most people choose not to do that math. You are no longer most people. You have crossed into a place that does not have an easy exit. Once you know the label language, you cannot unknow it. You put the pasta sauce back on the shelf. You buy tomatoes. You feel very proud of yourself for exactly 4 days before you realize that the canned tomatoes you bought as a healthy alternative also contain citric acid derived from corn. You are not winning. Nobody wins at this level. You're just becoming more informed and more annoyed in equal measure. Level 4, the Investigator. You go deeper. This is what people who go deeper always say they wish they hadn't done, and then they keep going deeper anyway because the alternative is going back to not knowing, and that gap closes behind you when you cross it. You learn about the Farm Bill. The United States federal government has been subsidizing corn since the Great Depression, originally to stabilize prices and protect farmers. What began as a crisis response became permanent infrastructure. In 2024, the government provided $9.3 billion in agricultural subsidy payments, and corn was the most subsidized crop of all. One estimate from Michael Pollan's research puts the cost of a bushel of corn at roughly $1 below what it actually costs to grow it. The difference is covered by the government, which means it's covered by taxpayers. You have been, without knowing it, subsidizing your own corn addiction through your tax returns. Because corn is so cheap to grow and so cheap to buy, the industrial food chain built itself around corn. The chicken you eat was raised on corn. The beef you eat was raised on corn. The pork was raised on corn. The farm salmon, which you bought because it seemed like a healthful alternative to all the other things, was raised on corn-based feed. You are not eating animals anymore. You are eating animals that ate corn so that you could, one step removed, also be eating corn. Then there's ethanol. Nearly 45% of the domestic corn crop in the United States goes not into food at all but into ethanol production for fuel. This was sold to the public as a green alternative energy source, a way to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Subsequent research complicated that story considerably. A study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that when you account for the carbon emissions from converting land to grow corn, ethanol may actually produce more greenhouse gas than the gasoline it replaces. Tens of millions of acres of land that had been in conservation programs were converted to corn fields in the years following the ethanol expansion. Midwestern aquifers are being drawn down by the water demand. Fertilizer runoff is creating dead zones in waterways. The land that used to grow a variety of things now grows one thing, from horizon to horizon, because one thing is what the system pays for. You sit with all of this. You ordered a bag of tortilla chips while you were reading because you needed something to do with your hands. You eat the entire bag before you notice what you're doing. The chips are made from corn. The irony is not lost on you. You eat another handful anyway because at this point the irony is just seasoning. Level 5, the Addict. Here is where it stops being abstract. You have read enough to know that high fructose corn syrup triggers a dopamine response in the brain's mesolimbic system, the same pathway activated by addictive substances. Researchers at Queens College of the City University of New York found that consuming high fructose corn syrup altered dopamine function in the brain even in the absence of weight gain, independent of any other dietary factor. Studies on adolescents who consumed HFCS-heavy diets found that the changes to brain chemistry persisted even after they stopped consuming it. The reward circuitry gets reorganized. The brain calibrates its baseline expectations around the presence of a substance and then becomes dysregulated when that substance is reduced. You know this. You have read the studies. You understand the mechanism. You also have a bag of microwave popcorn at 11 at night even though you are not hungry because you sat down to watch something and the sitting down to watch something triggered the need for popcorn, which is a need you did not consciously create. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that habitual movie popcorn eaters consumed the same amount of popcorn whether it was fresh or stale. The quality of the food was irrelevant. The environment had trained the behavior. The cue fires the behavior without consulting the rest of you. Wendy Wood, a psychology professor at the University of Southern California, put it plainly. Once we've formed an eating habit, we no longer care whether the food tastes good. You're eating week-old stale behavior and your brain is fine with it. You have tried 3 times to cut out processed corn products entirely. The first attempt lasted 5 days and ended at a gas station at 8 in the morning because every single item for sale at the gas station contained a corn derivative and you were hungry and running late and you bought the chips because the chips were there. The second attempt was more deliberate. You went to 3 different grocery stores. You read labels for 2 hours. You found a brand of crackers with only 4 ingredients, none of them corn-derived. You felt victorious. You got home and realized the salt on the crackers was iodized with dextrose and you sat on your kitchen floor for a minute processing this information. The third attempt you lasted 11 days. You lost 4 pounds. You had headaches on days 2 through 4 that you now recognize as consistent with sugar withdrawal. On the 12th day, you ate a slice of birthday cake at a colleague's party because you didn't want to explain the corn thing to anyone at a birthday party. The cake had high fructose corn syrup in the frosting. You ate 2 slices. You are not weak. You are not without willpower. You are navigating a food environment that researchers now compare, seriously and with documentation, to the tobacco industry, an industry that spent decades engineering its product to be as addictive as possible while funding science designed to muddy the conversation about what it was doing to people. The food companies hired food scientists to identify what they call the bliss point, the precise ratio of sugar, salt, and fat that keeps a person eating past the point of wanting to stop. They found it. They put it in the products. They put those products on every shelf in every store in every zip code in the country. You finished the popcorn. You put the bag on the table. You are not even watching the show anymore. Level 6, the Evangelist. You cannot stop talking about this. You bring it up at dinners. You bring it up at parties. You send articles to group chats that go unread. You start conversations with the phrase, "Do you know how much corn is actually in that?" at restaurants, at grocery stores, at holiday meals, once at a funeral because someone brought a casserole and you recognized the cornstarch in the consistency of the sauce and you had a moment before you stopped yourself and let the casserole be. You almost stopped yourself in time. Your friends develop a look. It is a specific look. It is the look people give someone who has recently learned something that they have decided is personally important and has not yet learned how to hold that information without pushing it at other people. You recognize the look. You have given the look to other people about other things. You don't stop anyway. The thing is, the information is real. About 61.9% of the calories that American children between ages 1 and 18 come from ultra-processed foods, according to data from the CDC's National Center for Health Statistics. Roughly 55% of all American calories, across all ages, come from ultra-processed foods. The most subsidized, most processed, most widely distributed ingredient in nearly all of those foods traces back to corn. You are not wrong. You're just really intense about being not wrong, and there is a version of you that is going to end up eating alone with a bowl of something grain-free while your friends quietly stop inviting you to places. You can feel this future approaching. You keep talking anyway because you haven't figured out yet how to care about something without making it everyone else's problem. This phase, if you are lucky, burns itself out after about 4 months. You don't stop caring. You just stop performing the caring quite so loudly. Level 7, the Purist. You try to actually quit, not just reduce. Quit. You are going to eliminate all processed corn derivatives from your diet, and you are going to do it for real this time, and you have a plan and a spreadsheet and a list of approved products you got from a forum for people with corn allergies, because those are the only people on earth who have done this comprehensively enough to have figured out which brands of baking powder don't use cornstarch and which brands of vitamin supplements don't use corn-derived dextrose as a filler. The corn allergy community is, it turns out, extremely thorough and extremely tired. They have been trying to eat food without corn derivatives for medical reasons, not philosophical ones, and they will tell you that the list of unexpected sources of corn runs to over 200 common items. Medications often use cornstarch as a binder. Iodized table salt contains dextrose to stabilize the iodine. Some brands of toothpaste, Some paper products treated with cornstarch. The plastic bags your produce comes in are sometimes coated with a corn derivative to prevent sticking. The wax on the apple is often carnauba wax, which is fine actually, but you spend 45 minutes looking it up before you can be sure. The withdrawal is real. Researchers have documented that quitting sugar, which is the primary form corn takes in your body when processed, produces symptoms consistent with other addictive withdrawal processes. Headaches, fatigue, irritability, mood disruption. Days 2 through 4 are the worst. Your concentration is unreliable. You are unreasonably angry about minor inconveniences. You think about chips with a frequency that embarrasses you. You don't want the chips. Your brain wants the chips. The difference feels very real from the inside and somewhat academic from the outside. By day 10 you feel different. Not cured of anything. Not transcendent. Just lighter in a way that is hard to describe and easy to dismiss as placebo. Your energy doesn't spike and crash the way it used to in the afternoon. You sleep more consistently. You spend more money on groceries than you have ever spent in your life because the unprocessed whole foods that form the basis of a corn-free diet are not subsidized by the federal government and therefore cost what they actually cost, which is more than most people can afford to pay on a regular basis without restructuring their budget. This is the thing that doesn't come up enough in the clean eating conversation. The conversation tends to frame processed food as a choice and unprocessed food as the obvious correct alternative. But the corn subsidy system has spent decades making processed food the cheapest available option. For large portions of the population, cutting corn derivatives out of the diet isn't just a nutritional decision. It's an economic one, and it requires resources that are not evenly distributed. The person working 2 jobs and feeding 3 kids does not have 2 hours to spend in 3 separate grocery stores reading labels. They have a gas station and a dollar store and a schedule that doesn't permit the philosophical luxury of food purity. You know this. You feel vaguely guilty about the spreadsheet. You stay on the plan for 3 weeks. Then you go home for a family gathering and your grandmother makes corn on the cob from her garden, and she puts it on the table with a little dish of butter, and she doesn't say anything about it. She doesn't have to. You eat it. It is perfect. You do not regret it. Some things are not about the substance. Level 8, the philosopher. You sit with the contradiction long enough that it becomes something other than a contradiction. Corn has been on this continent for somewhere between 5,000 and 9,000 years. Indigenous peoples in Mesoamerica, in what is now Mexico and Central America, took a wild grass called teosinte and over generations of careful selection bred it into something that could feed civilizations. What those farmers created was one of the most remarkable agricultural achievements in human history. The transformation of teosinte into maize was so complete that the 2 plants are barely recognizable as related. A wild teosinte ear has about a dozen tough, exposed kernels. A corn cob has hundreds. For Native American peoples across the continent, corn was not simply a crop. It was sacred. It appeared in creation stories, in harvest ceremonies, in the spiritual frameworks that organized the relationship between people and the land they depended on. The Haudenosaunee, the Sioux, the Maya, the Aztec, dozens of nations had their own traditions around corn that went far deeper than agriculture. In many traditions, corn was understood as a gift from spiritual beings who chose to give themselves so that people could survive. The Hopi still maintain ceremonies around corn that have been practiced for centuries. The concept of the 3 sisters, corn planted alongside beans and squash so that each one supports the others, is a sophisticated ecological and nutritional system developed over generations by indigenous farmers who understood something about interdependence that modern monoculture agriculture has spent the last century ignoring. When Columbus returned from the Americas in 1493, he brought corn seeds with him. Within a century, maize had transformed agriculture in Europe, Africa, and Asia. It fed people who would otherwise have starved. It was the most successful agricultural transfer in recorded history. What started as a sacred gift from people on this continent to the world became, over the centuries of colonization and industrial agriculture, a commodity, a substrate for high-fructose corn syrup, a fuel additive, a filler in vitamin supplements. The corn that grows in 90 million acres of American farmland, planted in tight monoculture rows, drenched in synthetic fertilizer, harvested by GPS-guided machines, and processed into glucose syrup and ethanol and cornstarch and dextrose and crystalline fructose is descended from something that people tended by hand for thousands of years because they understood it to be alive in a way that mattered. That thread is very long and very frayed, and it is still there. You think about your grandmother's garden. The way she grew one variety because she had always grown one variety and her mother had grown one variety before that. The corn she grew was not sacred exactly, not in any tradition you were raised in, but it was tended and cared for and eaten at a table with people you loved. It connected you, by a chain that is thin but unbroken, to every person who ever put that plant in the ground and waited for it to come up. That is not nothing. That is actually quite a lot. Level 9, the reckoning. Here is what too much corn, in its modern industrial form, does to a human body over time. The constant presence of high fructose corn syrup in the diet disrupts the hormones that regulate hunger and satiety. Leptin, the hormone that signals fullness, and ghrelin, the hormone that signals hunger, rely on normal metabolic function to do their jobs correctly. High fructose corn syrup metabolism in the liver bypasses the normal signaling pathway. The liver processes fructose differently from glucose, converting it to fat more readily, building up triglycerides, stressing the organ in ways that accumulate quietly over years. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which was once a condition associated almost exclusively with adults, is now diagnosed in children who have never consumed alcohol, but have consumed HFCS at the rates typical of an American childhood. The blood sugar spikes that come from corn-derived sugars trigger dopamine releases that create the cycle of craving and consumption. Over time, the dopamine receptors, specifically the D2 receptors associated with reward, become less dense in people who consume these substances chronically. Less dense means less responsive, which means you need more of the stimulus to achieve the same signal, which is the definition of tolerance, which is a feature of addiction. This is not metaphor. This is measurable brain chemistry. Type 2 diabetes is now understood by researchers to have a meaningful relationship with processed food addiction. The binge eating patterns driven by dopamine dysregulation lower insulin sensitivity over time, increasing the risk of metabolic disorder. Cardiovascular disease follows similar pathways. The inflammatory burden of chronic processed food consumption accumulates in ways that are slow enough to be invisible year to year and significant enough to shorten lives. About 30 million Americans will experience an eating disorder in their lifetime. Binge eating disorder, the most common eating disorder, is diagnosed more often than anorexia and bulimia combined. Up to 40% of people with type 2 diabetes meet the criteria for binge eating disorder. These numbers exist inside a food system that was designed by people with detailed knowledge of the biology to make stopping very hard. You hold this information. It is heavy. The instinct is to do something immediately and decisively with it, to make a resolution, to announce a change, to feel the forward momentum of a decision. Resolutions made from guilt tend not to hold. The people who study behavior change consistently find that understanding the mechanism, the way the system is designed, the way the brain chemistry works, matters more than willpower. You are not fighting yourself. You are navigating a designed environment with a designed food supply and a brain that evolved in a world that looked nothing like either of those things. That does not make the health consequences less real. It makes them make more sense. Level 10, the acceptance. You are standing in your grandmother's kitchen and it is summer and the corn is on the cob and the butter is in a little dish and everything smells right. Now everything you know. You know the corn is descended from something sacred. You know that 69% of your body carbon probably came from corn in one form or another. You know that the industrial corn system is burning through aquifers and displacing prairie ecosystems and that the subsidies keeping the price low are being paid for by your tax dollars. You know that the high fructose corn syrup in the soda you drank this morning triggered a dopamine response that your D2 receptors are less equipped to handle than they were when you were younger. You know that the food industry studied your brain's reward pathways with the precision of a pharmaceutical company and then optimized their products accordingly. You know that the withdrawal headaches are real and the cravings are real and the habit loops are real and that none of this is, at its root, about willpower. You also know that the corn on your plate right now was grown by someone who planted it in the ground and watered it and waited for it and picked it before the heat of the day and put it in a pot because you were coming for dinner. And you know that 9,000 years ago someone in Mesoamerica looked at a scraggly wild grass and decided to see what it could become with enough patience and enough care, and that what it became is what is on your plate right now, and probably, after all that time and all that history and all that transformation. The information doesn't go away. It lives alongside the meal now rather than underneath it. You have reached the level where you hold two things at the same time without one of them winning. The corn is part of an industrial system that has done real and measurable harm to human health, to the environment, to the economic livelihood of small farmers, to the nutritional landscape of the poorest communities in the country. That is true, and it stays true, and it needs to be reckoned with at the level of policy and agriculture and food industry regulation, not just at the level of personal grocery shopping decisions. One person choosing the crackers with 4 ingredients does not fix a system that was built over 7 decades of policy decisions, lobbying, and scientific obfuscation. The fixes that matter are structural. The individual choices matter at the margins and matter a lot to your own body and matter not at all to the aquifer or the subsidy or the lobby. And the corn is also what someone put on a table for you because they love you. Those two things exist in the same space now. You roll the ear through the butter. The butter melts into the rose. You take a bite and it tastes like summer in the specific way that summer tasted when you were 6 years old and had nowhere to be. You are still addicted. Most people are. The question is what you do with that knowledge when you leave the kitchen and go back to the grocery store and stand in the aisle again holding a jar of pasta sauce, reading the label, understanding what you're looking at, making the best decision you can with the information and the resources and the time you have. That's it. That's the whole game at this level. You finish the ear. You take another. You are deeply, completely, probably permanently in the grip of something that started in a garden 9,000 years ago and now lives in everything on every shelf in every store in every country on earth. The butter is very good. You are very glad you came for dinner. If you learned something today, like and subscribe. It helps us make more of this.